to American Education FM, everybody. I'm Dr. Sean Brooks. Ladies and gentlemen, in this episode, I have a discussion with JT from Dallas, Texas. JT is in the Army Reserves. He's served in our military for a number of years. His wealth of knowledge of the military is massive. And he and his wife homeschool using the ABECA program with their children. He's got a lot of experience. This is an excellent conversation. A lot of topics get brought up. We talk about, again, homeschooling, the benefits. He gets into the specifics of the ABECA program. We talk about the military, the jab rollout, and again, the ongoing war that's taking place here. And he has also had a family member who has passed away as a result of the jabs. So this is basically a giant two-part conversation. It's all in one episode here, but please give this a listen. A lot of valuable information, and it was a pleasure to have him on, and I hope to have him on back soon. So without further ado, here is our conversation, and I'll catch you on Friday.
My wife and I and our two kids, I think, are the only ones not jabbed on both sides of our family.
Wow.
So, it is insane. Even my in-laws, they're pretty, red-pilled. Not with everything, but pretty far along. I would say red-pilled more than most, and they got the jab early on because of their age. I would say I think they got it back in like March or April, earlier this year, long before anybody was talking about the side effects or anything like that, and long before they knew about the ingredients, in the jabs themselves. So it's talking to my mother-in-law, and I don't know if she'll ever hear this. I know she knows I'm going to be on your podcast, so she may listen to it eventually. I know there's a part of her that regrets getting it, but and then my side of the family, they're just all they do is watch TV. And I just got done listening to your last episode.
Yeah.
And you're sitting there talking about, hey, turn off TV, turn off TV, turn off TV, and I've been screaming that for God knows how long, years now. And we quit watching news. I quit watching the news, well over a decade ago, just because it's just all garbage. And if I could just get my parents to do it, then they're smart people. That's the sad part.
Yeah, that's interesting. It doesn't seem to be a matter of, I don't know. Everybody's definition of smarts or intelligence is certainly different, but
yeah,
when an individual has the truth lie in their lap and they just throw it off of their lap and go, I don't want to hear about this. I'm not interested in this. I just find that I don't think that's intelligent.
Yeah. Oh, it's crazy because, my dad in particular, I would say has, outside of him not being red-pilled, I would say, generally speaking, has some of the best common sense of anybody that I've ever met. And these last 2 years is just like undone everything that, I've come to respect about the man, because it's like, he'll go out there and he'll read stuff, but like he's reading the wrong things. And when I push stuff his way, and I stopped doing it a long time ago, probably, about a year ago, I quit pushing him stuff regarding all this nonsense, and he just, would just dismiss it, and it's just like, well, what about John Hopkins? I'm like, yeah, they're lying too, Dad. Like, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
So this whole weekend was pretty nuts because my mom got sick last week, and it was shortly after my unjabbed kids were over at her house, and my kids were not sick prior to them going over there, mind you. Well, my youngest daughter, who's 5, she came back and she was just a little, congested and stuffed up. I told my wife, hey, it's probably because she was around people that were jabbed. They're just shedding on her, And I keep telling my wife, like, this is going to happen until, either everybody stops shedding or they all drop dead or we just stop going over there. Which is pretty grim, I realize, but it's got to be said.
Sure.
So she gets sick, and it turns out today that she went to the doctor and she has bronchitis, which will kind of tie into the other family member that I'll bring up here in a second. But when we were over there for Christmas on Sunday, my dad had a sore throat, and we walk in the house, and mind you, since I've been back from my deployment in last January, I've never been around my parents, and I've never seen them masked, but I know they go into town masked. So like when they go to Costco, Walmart, you name it, I know they mask up, even though they're jabbed. And I just think that's, ridiculous. But we came over, and we walk in the house, and my dad's wearing not one mask, but two masks. And
wow.
I just couldn't, I almost walked out and told my wife, let's just leave. Because that's not who I know. I don't know that guy anymore. He's so afraid of this fake flu that it's just controlling everything that he does and what he thinks. And he's supposed to be the smart one of the two, which is even crazier, right? So, and then I think that the part that made the whole day better was my oldest. She's 8, so she's in 2nd grade. She has worldly knowledge already. She listens to your podcast whenever she's in the vehicle, so she kind of gets pieces, of your podcast here and there. She obviously knows who you are. She just refers to you as the education guru or whatever. So,
well, sorry, I apologize for cursing.
No. Oh well, I mean, you're not as bad as quite frankly. There's times where we want her to listen to that, but then he'll go into the grab bag and talk about something sexual. We got to go. Oh, can't listen to that no more.
Yeah.
And the cursing, she's gotten used to it. We've told her hey, people in the world cuss. It's gonna happen. Heck, I do it to her all the time. I do it in front of her all the time too. So I'm no saint myself. But she knows that it happens, and she knows not to do it. So she's pretty smart. But so she knows that this whole vaccine and the wearing of the mask is just the stupidest thing in the world because of everything that we've let her listen to, and then we've explained how outside of the pedophilia and the stuff like that, we've explained what evil really looks like in the world, and kind of what the globalist agenda is, in a nutshell, as best as we can explain it to somebody, with some of the big key pieces missing. So she understands all that. And we were at the dinner table, and she went to go give my dad a hug or whatever, because he was sitting there talking to her, and he's still wearing his mask and whatnot. And she goes, "Papa, why are you wearing masks?" And he goes, something along the lines of, "Well, I'm feeling sick, and I don't want any of y'all to get sick." And I kid you not, I've never seen her eyes roll so bad in my life. Her eyes just rolled into the back of her head like it was the most insane, ridiculous thing she ever heard. And I couldn't have been prouder. So I was like, "Oh, that's my girl." I go, "Well, this day has kind of been kind of weird, but at least, even when she's around family members who think something completely opposite of her parents, people that she respects and loves and cherishes, she still reverts back to kind of what we've taught her and explained to her. And obviously we've laid a really good foundation there. And it was just kind of like a breath of fresh air. I kind of relaxed a little bit. I was like, "Oh, I'm doing really good with that one."
Wow.
So, it was nuts. And then she started asking him, why and stuff like that. And obviously I had to cut her off because we've gotten in arguments before about everything. And the last thing I want is an argument to start because of my 8-year-old daughter.
But that's, I don't know, man. I got to tell you, that's a testament to you and your wife on raising children that can see through the weeds like that. That's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, we had a long conversation, me and my wife did, about, she was kind of hesitant about wanting to teach her about all the evil. And I go, "Honey," "it's everywhere. She needs to know that it exists. She needs to know that it's vastly different than what she sees, on movies and stuff like that. There's a big difference between, fairy tales. I mean, not necessarily fairy tales, but, the Disney movies that we've allowed her to watch and stuff like that." And, we had a pretty long discussion, and I kind of started it with kind of like of like a brain teaser, and I encourage other parents to do this too. Your kids watch a lot of media. It's not like whenever we were kids, where I rarely watched TV. If I did, it was at night because I was outside all day long. And we had a family TV, so it's not like we all had individual TVs for all of us to watch. At a whim's notice. So I was sitting there talking to her, and I go, okay, of all the stuff that you've seen, movies, TV shows, books that you've read, name some bad guys and stuff like that you think are bad. And obviously she's starting, naming off, some of the bad guys from the Disney movies, some of the older ones, and I said, okay, let's compare some of those, which ones are more evil than the other ones and why. And she kind of got to the point where she brought up Maleficent, right? And how she was pretty evil and she was just doing it because she could, type of thing, and just because, of envy and whatnot. I was like, okay, well, who else? What else? And I kid you not, this is another moment where I was proud, and I told my wife, because my wife was at work at the time, so it was just me having the conversation with them. She actually brought up the Pharaoh from Moses' time, right? So obviously we let her watch The Prince of Egypt, which is a great movie. We think, especially since it's a cartoon. And she sat there and she says, "Oh, the Pharaoh, he would be the worst one I've seen." And I didn't think she was going to come up with that, right? Because they've only seen it a couple times, and that's on me. I want to make them watch it more, just that way they can, be more aware of that story because of how powerful that story is, especially when it comes to good and evil and stuff like that. And the fact that she came up with that, and I go, well, "What did he do?" And she was sitting there talking about how he was, she mainly focused on like the murder. She didn't really focus on the enslavement part as much because I still don't think she fully grasps that. Which we had a conversation about that as well. Like what enslavement actually means. And all that. That way, she understood that from a fundamental level, not just she watched a movie with slaves in it, but they didn't really showcase it, so she doesn't really understand that concept. So we kind of went over that as well, just that I knew for a fact she knew what enslavement actually meant, and how it's forced labor, not necessarily you're being told to do it. Because she was like, "Well, isn't it the same as you just telling me what to do, and then I have to go do my chores?" I was like, "No, big difference." So, the fact that she brought up the Pharaoh, and she was like, "Yeah, that's probably the most evil person I know." And I go, "Well, that's a good one." And then I explained how basically we're dealing with people that are pretty similar to how the Pharaoh is now. They're just doing it in more subtle ways and doing it in ways where it's super secretive, where they're not necessarily showcasing what they're doing. And you got to be on the lookout for that type of stuff. And I told her, and obviously we haven't got to this lesson yet, but I told her in future lessons we're going to go over signs, symbols, and ways to look for how they're hiding all that stuff. And, it'll be, we plan on it being like a long series of, teaching our kids about evil. And, that way they have something to compare it to. Because, obviously we raised them to be, God-fearing Christians. And, there's certain books in the Bible that we've been kind of keeping them away just because it'd be pretty much over their head. So we've been trying to focus on more of not the doom and gloom, but the more of the bright side of things and whatnot. And that's why we're trying to introduce more of the doom and gloom side of things. That way they understand that it exists. If that makes sense.
It does. That's absolutely fantastic. It's great. It warms my heart just hearing that, man. It really does.
Yeah, and I'm hoping other people will hear it. I'm going to try to get some of my family's cousins in on it because they've been talking about sending their kids to private school as opposed to public school. And I'm trying to really encourage them to not even do the private school, even though we're in Texas and it's a pretty free state. I'm trying to convince them to do homeschool and, for the most part, lean towards maybe doing like a co-op type thing with us, even though their son's a little bit younger, the one family in particular. But try to push them more that way just because, obviously from listening to your podcast, and then I know it from, our own personal experience, right, that private schools can be just as corrupt, as public schools. The huge difference is they typically have more funding.
Yeah.
So especially, like the areas that we live in Texas, so I know you've passed through here and you've been through here quite a bit. So we're in the Dallas region. So we're the area that we're in. is not. It's the majority of the area is upper middle class, and whatnot. So there's, we don't have to go very far to find a lot of money getting thrown at schools, and the private schools in our area. Whenever we were looking at putting our older daughter, into private schools, we were kind of leaning towards like Montessori type stuff and stuff that it was, more Christian related. That way they were having that in their curriculum. They were all booked, and it was like a waiting list of over 2 years. It was just like, yeah, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
Not to mention that, I don't like paying, buku's amount of money for something that, obviously that we can do ourselves since we're doing it now.
There you go. Yeah.
So,
what was your overall reasoning then for the homeschooling? Because again, you sent me some bullet points, and I'd like to go through them because they're absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. So initially, we just because of we had the conversation early on whenever we got married. Because we got married when we were about, I think, 27, 28, we were like, okay, we got to hurry up and have kids before, we get too old and whatnot. So we kind of rushed into having kids, pretty quickly after being married. So there wasn't really much of a honeymoon period. So we started talking about and we both went to high school together. We didn't date, but we knew each other. We hung out with some of the same group of friends. We didn't really hang outside of school, just, because she was a girl, I'm a boy, and I was an idiot and a dork, and I wasn't really hanging out with girls that much. But, we talked about our experiences in high school and, my frustrations with the education system, looking at it from a student perspective, right, where I felt like, obviously it's the state and the city's job to hire, the best teachers possible. And I get it. There's teacher shortages everywhere, and you're never going to find the best teachers. And especially where we grew up, where my graduating class was about 120 to 150 people. So we're talking a tiny school at the time, which has obviously, blown up since then. But, you're not going to get the best teachers out in the middle of nowhere and whatnot. But still, it was just, we had teachers that cared more about being friends with some of the students than they cared about teaching. Like, there was times where I was in class and, they would kind of like what you talked about and what other people, other guests on the podcast talked about, right? Where they were the typical teacher where it's like, oh, hey, look, here's some homework, go do it. And then they popped in the movie for the day. And it's just like, if they're doing that, if they were doing that, in the, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, right? Like, they're going to keep doing that now. Maybe they have a little bit more, government oversight, since they're starting to put cameras freaking everywhere. But, teachers are going to try to get away with whatever they can because they don't want, and you know it best, and you say it all the time, and I always nod my head in agreement, they're always going to try to get out of work. Everybody is always trying to get out of work. It's not going to be any different for teachers.
Right.
So we had that as a foundation. We talked to the parents. We got her parents' blessing on it, pretty quick. Her dad's a Baptist minister, so he's very, 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 by the Bible and Jesus and everything. My parents were pretty big Christians, but they had some falling out. Just with previous ministers at the church they went to a little over 10 years ago, and we don't have to get into that, in this episode. And that's not really school related, but
you can bring it up if you want. Go for it.
Well, we had one minister. I shit you not. We're all at home one day, and I think I was about 20 at the time, maybe 19, and I was home from college. And we get a phone call from a bunch of the different members from the church, and the minister at the time had just got raided his house had just got raided by the FBI because of child pornography. And they had adopted some kids, and he was actually using the adopted kids and his pornography on top of that. So it was that rocked them pretty hard. It actually brought the church closer together, oddly enough, because, we all came together to support, because the wife had no idea. we came together to support the wife and the kids and whatnot. And then it was a Methodist church, so obviously, the people don't always get a say in who becomes the next minister. And the next minister that came in was just one of those, money hungry, people that was using the church for more of a job and a paycheck than as a service, and that was enough for my parents. And eventually they said, enough is enough. And I think they've gone to church maybe twice since then. And that was, that had to have been about 12, 13 years ago.
Wow.
So, yeah. And like in contrast, right, my father-in-law, he doesn't take a paycheck from the church. And when they try to give him any sort of money, he donates it back to either the church or other missionaries that work through the church. So, like, in contrast, it kind of gives you an idea of the type of person that one minister was compared to who he is, or who my father-in-law is. And it's just like, yeah, and then and that's rocked my parents ever since. And they're still Christians. They're just not, I guess, for lack of better words, practicing. But so we went to my parents with it, and my dad's an academic, and he went to a big West Coast school, and they both grew up in Arizona. So my dad is actually a registered Democrat living in Texas, which is actually kind of funny. Even though he's voted, I'm pretty sure he's voted Republican ever since Clinton, Bill Clinton. So obviously a change of heart there, or what have you.
Yeah.
But he never thought, and at the time, it was primarily my wife that was going to be doing all the homeschooling, because she was the one staying at home with the kids naturally. She was a housewife before we had kids, and then she was going to be a stay-at-home mom. And she, for the most part, she basically is too now. She's just a personal trainer on top of that. So she's gone in the evenings when I'm home with the kids, and then she's home with them all day. So it's really no different. It's just she's bringing in some extra money now, which is nice. Thank you, honey.
Yeah.
Oh, she'll listen, I promise. And then, so my parents were pretty opposed to it because they just didn't think she was qualified. Obviously, my wife didn't have any type of teacher background or anything like that, and my parents have a higher, well, what's the word? I guess higher standard for what education should be, which I think is misguided and misplaced. For well over 30, 40 years now, because it's not the same as when my dad went to college. So initially we didn't do it. Initially we sent her, and then we actually had the conversation with her back when she was preschool age, my older daughter, mind you. And we actually asked her, hey, you can, when we kind of told her what homeschool was, and, as best as we could to a 4-year-old, right? And we explained to her kind of what public school would be like, and we kind of let her be the tiebreaker, because we were like, let's do homeschool. And my parents were like, nah, you guys should really do public school. She'll get to socialize. She can do activities, all the nonsense that she doesn't actually need to go to school for. And after talking to her, she goes, well, I want to try public school, and if I don't like it, you guys can pull me out. But I really want to go there because I want to make friends. And I'm like, okay, well, that's pretty good. I can't really argue with that logic. If her only logic is, hey, I want to go there primarily to make more friends and whatnot, who am I to keep a kid from having a happy childhood? So we actually tried it out. We let her it was full-time preschool, and then we were about midway through kindergarten, and we were already talking about pulling her out, and then COVID happened. So we were already planning on pulling her out, primarily because she wasn't getting anything out of it. The school was just not doing a good job of, I guess, not actual test taking, but they weren't actually testing her abilities, and they just weren't doing it enough. And it was at the point where, my wife and I were doing so much after school work with her that we were like, what's the point of sending her to school if we're going to do all this stuff with her anyway? Like, this is stuff that we would have done if we were homeschooling. Let's pull her out, and then that way, we can control everything she learns. And she's not going to learn about God in school. If anything, she's going to get indoctrinated no matter how hard we try. So we were pretty much getting ready to pull her out anyway. And then COVID happened, and then the school put out some guidelines that, they were going to have to wear masks to come back and all that jazz. And my wife said a resounding hell no. And I was actually in Afghanistan for all of 19 and 2020, and I came back in January of this year. So I was gone for the majority of the lockdowns and stuff like that. So I was getting everything through text and video chat. My wife was like, I'm pulling her out. I was like, you got my vote. I didn't want to send her to public school to begin with. It was kind of one of those things where we let peer pressure get the best of us, and we put her in there, and then almost instantly, regretted it. And ever since we pulled her out, she's just made extreme strides, across the board with every subject, and including subjects that, she's learning subjects that she would never learn if she was in school right now, because we're doing subjects early.
Yeah.
So, and then we ultimately decided that once we pulled her out, we would never send our 5-year-old, because she would still be technically, because of her birthday, she would technically still be in preschool right now. And she's like her dad; she's pretty hyper. So she would be one of those ones that would probably be in trouble all the time, and then the school would want to try to, put her on Ritalin or Adderall or whatever they're giving kids these days, and we're not going to let them do that. So, so we decided with her, we're not even going to test the waters. We were going to homeschool her from the get go, and we started homeschooling our older daughter at around the age of 2 to 3. We let her go to preschool, which she didn't learn anything new. She got to kindergarten. She basically knew everything that she was learning in kindergarten already because of all the work that we did prior to her going. And that's whenever we decided to pull her out. So that's that in a nutshell.
That's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. You're actually doing it the way it's supposed to be done. I mean, I don't know what else to say. You're doing it exactly the way that it's supposed to be done. And just to revisit one of your earlier points, the business of an adult, in particular a mother or a father, not being qualified to teach their own child is absurd. And
it's a load of crock.
Absolutely. If anyone, any human being ever says such a thing, and you'll hear teachers say it constantly,
yep.
Educators will be the first to say that. Well, you're not trained to be a teacher. Well, you're not trained to educate. There is no better educator than a parent. That's the whole point.
And beside that point, we could take a look at it from a legal standpoint. The state of Texas has one of the least restrictive laws when it comes to homeschooling, right? Across the entire nation. And we are one of the few states that does not require a teacher certificate in order to homeschool your kid. So it's a moot point. And so when we finally decided to pull her out, and we went and talked to my parents about it, and not that we were going to them for approval or anything like that, but like any good, they were good parents to me growing up. So I always go to them for advice just to get out of my own head. Who else am I supposed to go to? So that's kind of what I typically do is I go to my dad, we have a discussion, and then that's what we go from there. I'm finding that I'm doing that less and less over the last 2 years, obviously. But we were sitting there telling him, and I sat there, I was like, you know what, it's time to tell him about all the indoctrination stuff, all the stuff that they're trying to do with, I know you hate the term, but CRT, so more critical theory, the sexualization of all these kids and how they're doing it, and like the trans agenda. And mind you, we're out in the country in a red state, and we're in a completely red county, right? Like, I don't know if our county's ever voted blue.
Yeah.
So in terms of diehard conservatism, I can can tell you right now, you don't see very much, you didn't see very many Biden stickers in our area where we live, and it's almost Trump, everywhere, which has its connotations too, I know, but, just, for the listeners out there, to kind of get an idea of what it's like, we don't live in the city like in Dallas where almost everything's blue. We're out on the outskirts, pretty far on the outskirts, and everything out here is pretty red because we're out here and it's a lot of farm, a lot of farms are out here. Obviously, those are starting to go away too, but, that's kind of what we live around. So, pretty heavy conservative area. There's a church like every other block. You can throw a stone and probably hit 20 churches, in the area that we live in. So it's pretty, at least in old terms, religious, not so much anymore, but that kind of gives you an idea. And then the fact that we didn't think the school was doing enough kind of just shows you that I think if it can happen in a red county like ours, where we don't think that they're doing a good job of incorporating the values that we hold dear, then they're certainly not going to do it in areas that aren't, conservative.
And see that's an excellent point too. The school is never going to do that. The school environment is never going to meet the expectations of sound-minded parents,
right,
who know exactly what they want for their children. The sad part is that so many parents just forfeit and give all of the teaching and learning abilities, quote unquote, to the school and to government. Yeah. And my God, when that happens, their children don't stand a chance in the future.
But I can tell you right now from talking to a lot of people, and that's one of the things that I hear in your podcast all the time, and sometimes I don't think they see it that way. Whenever they see public schools, I don't think they ought. I think that's how dumbed down a lot of America has become. When they hear public schools are teaching their kids, I don't think they equate it to government, because they're not thinking that it's government teaching their kids. They think it's that old farm homegrown teacher that's teaching them that came from somewhere in Indiana to come teach their kids, and that's not the case anymore. Like, that ship is sailed decades ago, and I don't think a lot of people put two and two together whenever they're sitting there looking at the education system as, this is big government now.
Yeah, and it shifts big time once they reach middle school and high school. In fact, the middle school and high school mentality of having multiple teachers has infiltrated the elementary schools in a way that never used to exist. Now elementary school students have more than one teacher. I mean, when the two of us were going to school, we primarily had one teacher. Yeah,
I mean, I didn't have multiple teachers until basically high school.
Yeah,
I think maybe 8th grade or 7th grade, maybe, but definitely not 6th grade. Trying to remember. That's pretty far back.
Yeah, but the parents think, they think to themselves, well, it's Mr. So-and-so that's teaching my children, and we like Mr. So-and-so, or it's Mrs. So-and-so that's teaching our daughter, and we like Mrs. So-and-so. The problem is that Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so are brainwashed in many cases, and they're doing what they are told to do. And if they don't push that material down the throats of students, then they're out of a job.
Well, and the crazy part was because of how small our town was. Whenever I was growing up, a lot of my teachers were people that were my parents' age that went to church with us. So I knew them from church. Like, a lot of times, because of the way that that community was and whatnot, they didn't like us for whatever reason, calling them by their last name, Mr. and Mrs. whatever. So a lot of them were having us call them by their first name. And then I would get those teachers in middle school or high school, and I've known them for 10, 15 years at this point, and I'm like fighting not to call them by their first name because that's how I know them, and I know their kids and all that kind of stuff, and and whatnot. So that's how it was when we were kids, but it's not like that anymore. Like, we went into I'd sit there and talk to a friend of ours that works for the school, and I was sitting there asking about certain teachers that were there, and obviously, it's been quite a while since me and my wife went, so we knew a lot of them were going to be retired or moved on or whatever. But just to kind of get an idea of who was there. I didn't recognize a single name. They were probably all, brought in from the outside of the community. So they're probably, none of them are probably, homegrown teachers, if you will, right? So, and it's like, well, if I don't know any of the teachers, what's the point of my kid going to a small school?
Yeah.
So it's not like I can go and talk to them and go, hey, I have a relationship with you from when we were kids or whatever, or, over the years. What the heck's going on or whatever? And that ship sailed a long time ago just because the county decided to blow up, and the school just gotten so enormous now that it's crazy. But yeah, I mean, I guess kind of go back. We talked to my dad, and we kind of explained to him how what we were thinking and why we were doing it all, and we finally got him on board. And now they think homeschool is a great idea because now they get to see the fruit of all our work, and they see how she's reading at a grade level that's 2-3 grades higher than what our older daughter's reading, right? So it's just like they're seeing all that effort that we've been putting into her, and they're like, oh yeah, homeschool's probably great. And it's just like, yeah, whatever. Y'all weren't saying that 3 years ago.
Yeah, that's fantastic. What are, describe some of the pros and cons with the Abeka system, and describe it the best you can. Because again, you clearly know way more about it than I do. I clearly offer it up because I've talked with some individuals
Right.
about the program. I've briefly read through it, but again, I haven't taken a nosedive into it yet.
So, and obviously our kids aren't high school age, and I've not looked at the curriculum for the high school age, but I'm not as concerned about it. And I used to tutor for math, history, and science, and I would do second grade through the second year of college. And I did that as a side gig because it was my way of trying to help other kids, and obviously I was making getting a paycheck from it too, so it helped me. So I have that as a background. So our concern as parents as the kid gets older kind of diminishes because with what me and my wife deem the harder subjects, I got those in the bag. When it comes to the only thing I don't know is biology and anatomy and health, which is obviously more your forte, but that's also my wife's forte. Like she's a personal trainer, and so she loves anatomy and health and all that kind of stuff. So where I drop the ball, she picks it up. But in terms of the Abeka, my wife did the initial research into all the different homeschooling programs out there, and we sat there and had a pretty long discussion on which one we were going to go with. And the ultimate reason why we went with the Abeka is because of how interlaced Christianity was within the curriculum, right? So a good example of that would be for the listeners out there, especially at the early ages, whenever they're learning how to read and stuff like that. Not every story is about puppies and squirrels and rabbits. They throw in a lot of kid versions of classic Bible stories, right? So like we saw a few about Noah. You see some. You have some Joshua in there. You got some Daniel, the book of Daniel. You've got some really good stories that are interwoven into the curriculum, and when we kind of heard that they were interwoven the Christianity into the curriculum, we were like, well, that's a smart way of doing it, and we appreciate that, right? Like that's we don't take our kids to Sunday school because of personal issues that we have with churches in the area, and their morals and beliefs not lining up with ours, mostly COVID related now. But so because of that, we don't send our kids to Sunday school. So that's like little bits and pieces of Sunday school for them whenever they're doing that type of stuff. And it's not just in their readers. It's also embedded into their science. It's also embedded into the history here and there. And then they'll also do it into the math, right? So they'll do some math problems where it's like, I think one in particular was they did some of the parables, and they just decided to change up some of the terminology and make it a math equation and whatnot. And do my kids know that they're actually learning about Jesus whenever they're doing some of this stuff? Maybe, maybe not. But I can't complain if that's what the subliminal message is, right? So I'd rather it be that than some other agenda. Um, and then, so I would say that's probably the biggest pro, and that's probably why we went with them. We liked the curriculum better. It was a little bit easier. It's also packaged very nicely. You can actually go on to the Abeka website and order like entire kits for each grade, and then they have supplemental material if you don't think the kit by itself is sufficient. And then I would say more importantly, if you didn't want to just stick with Abeka, say you wanted to pull from a bunch of different resources, which is kind of what we do, but we primarily use Abeka. The Abeka website allows you to go and purchase individual subjects. That way, if you want to get subjects from a different, for lack of better words, provider, you could supplement it with material from a different provider. So there was that leeway with that program. And then on top of that, it's an accredited program. So it's a program that's recognized, at least in Texas. I can't speak for every other state. If my kids want to go to college, it's one of those programs that is nationally accredited. So it's a considerably easier transition. It's not one of those ones where, you know, the parents came up with all the school material and they have to keep really good records and then prove that they learned all these different subjects in order for them to get into college and stuff like that. If that makes sense.
It does. That's great. So they send all the materials for the grade level that you purchase. They send all the materials straight to your house.
Oh yeah. You know, basically just like going on, you know, communist Amazon and, you know, making a book purchase there and having it shipped to your house.
Right.
So,
can you ballpark the price?
I think it's different depending on what you get. But I would say it's reasonable. I wouldn't say it's priced high. Now, I don't know if I could give you a good ballpark price because we supplement the crap out of it, and that's probably the price tag that I'm thinking of. Right. But I would say it's only like a few hundred, just for the Abeka stuff, you know, for each. And it's not, when you're getting the material, it's not just for that one semester. At least not right now. I don't know how high school is, so I'm sure there's people out there listening saying high school's not that way. But at least for the grades that we have now and the grades that we've purchased, the material is usually for the entire school year. So that's another, I would say, another plus is it's not broken up by semester yet. I would say those are the pretty good advantages, and it's pretty easy, especially at the early stages. So if you have young kids like I do, I think the material is pretty stupid easy to grasp. So if you don't think you are a good teacher, I think it's relatively easy. Now, I will say, for those people out there that aren't good at math, which I know is a lot of people from who I talk to, because that's usually the subject that gets everybody, right? From when I talk to parents that, you know, where their kid needs help, or, you know, whenever I was doing the tutoring and stuff like that, it was almost every subject. If it wasn't math, it was writing, right? And I would help with the writing too, but it was usually math, because it was the one subject that, you know, unless that parent went into a field that uses math, they didn't really dwell on it in school, and they never took it in higher education, you know, beyond, you know, like Algebra 2 or trigonometry, and that's when they were kind of struggle. And then it's concepts they haven't used in, you know, decades. So it's like stuff that they just plain forget about, which is completely understandable. Like my wife's in that boat, you know, bless her heart. She wants to be able to do the math with my older daughter, but it's to the point where she's just not remembering all of it, and it's considerably more fresh in my mind. And I'm a math whiz anyway because of, you know, the everything that I've done with my education. So naturally, we're at the point now where I'm starting to do a lot more of the math with my older daughter, and my wife kind of takes more of a back seat to it. But pretty easy to understand, pretty straightforward. Like you said, with homeschool, the beauty is if they can read, they can pretty much self-teach. Our 8-year-old is pretty much there. She can pretty much do all her subjects by herself. The only thing that she, I would say, has an issue with is obviously vocabulary. So if a new word gets introduced that she's never learned, we haven't got to the point where we've allowed her to free roam on the internet. I've talked about doing computer classes with her to teach her how to do basic, not Google, but Google searches, and that way and then we're in the process of trying to find her a dictionary that we agree with. We're trying to find an older dictionary.
There you go.
That doesn't have words that we don't agree are words, from new agendas. So we're trying to find a dictionary in the thesaurus that's, pretty old school. That way she can have that at her disposal. That way she doesn't have to rely on the internet to figure out what a new word is, and then she doesn't have to rely on us. So that's one of the ones that we're trying to break right now. So since they're younger, they get used to the idea of asking questions on everything they don't understand, and what we're trying to do is foster that notion of, hey, if you don't understand something, either reading your book to try to figure out what to do, or research it. And for us, research is going to include encyclopedias, dictionaries, and the thesaurus. So that, I would say, that pretty much covers the advantages. I can go over the disadvantages now if you like.
Sure.
I would say the biggest disadvantage, and we're kind of running into it on the math one right now, it doesn't have, basically when it's teaching them new concepts, it's not showing, they're not doing it the old way of doing math. So the old way of doing math, the way that, my wife and I, the way that we learn math is basically getting pulled out of textbooks, and they're trying to go towards more of, this new style of teaching math where it's more focused on showing your work and having the credit for showing your work, as opposed to, actually accomplishing the right answer. On top of showing your work, if you will. And obviously with math, there's a bazillion different ways to solve every problem, and when you're learning a new concept, you have to be shown how they want you to learn how to do it. And sometimes the Abeka material doesn't do a really good job of showing the multiple different ways to do it. So that's generally where I have to supplement it. Now, for the parents out there freaking out, like, I don't know how to do all that, with the math stuff, there's plenty of online, online knowledge where you could go and pull that on, hey, how do I do this?
Yeah, there are endless math websites that are free where you can just pop in a problem and it'll show you a step-by-step process on how to do it. In fact, high school students already know that, and they just look up answers on their cell phones all the time.
Exactly. Yeah, and then I was going to say the other thing, which is a little bit less conventional, but I would argue, go find an old textbook. They're out there. You can find old and used textbooks, and I would recommend, especially if it's a subject that, parents aren't super comfortable teaching, go get an old textbook of, how it was done whenever you were a kid. That way, it's a concept that you just may need a refresher. And then the second you see that refresher, you'll be like, oh, light bulb, it's coming back to me. Because that's what the issue that we run into with my wife, God bless her. She's going to hate me when she listens to this. She'll see something and she's like, I can't figure out how they want her to do this. And I don't know what they're asking, because they're using different vocabulary than what was taught when we were in school. And it's like, this is just a word that means this. I was like, they just want you to do it. And then I do the example. She's like, well, that's stupid. Why are they showing it like that? It's like, that's their new way of doing math, because they're trying to, they're trying to match, the vocabulary and the way to do things, for whenever they go to college, which I do not agree with, because that's not how math is done in the real world.
Right. Now she's 100% right, because again, the consistent manipulation of the definitions on how to do something, in particular with math, that's supposed to be a hands-off subject. That's not a subject that's ever supposed to change. And yet the simple fact that it's being changed, even in a, quote-unquote homeschooling program, is problematic. There's no doubt. Right.
And I imagine, I doubt anybody from Abeka is listening to the podcast, but in the event that they are, I imagine, I thought about it one day, and I tried to understand it from their perspective, and the only thing I can come up with is the only reason why I can think that they decided to change some of the terminology and the way that they were showing how to do it is to match up with the accreditation, right? So if they wanted to continue to be accredited, not to the degree where they're, including all these crazy agendas that are out there right now, but in terms of, hey, we can change a vocabulary word here or there, or, change the phrasing on how to do this problem and stuff like that. Something that is, it's not gonna hurt anybody's feelings. It's not gonna change your moral viewpoints. It's not gonna, it's not gonna, encroach on your principles or anything. It's just gonna change the way that you learn how to do something and, and whatnot. I don't have an issue with that, to some degree. But my only complaint would be if you're going to change the way that you want certain people to learn how to do things, then maybe you should show more examples of how to do it.
Yep, you're dead right.
And that would be that's my biggest complaint. I would say a minor complaint with history. They do a really good job on giving more of a Christian/conservative history. I would argue that they need to dwell on it more and explain it better. So what we typically do with history in particular, especially since everything's getting changed as we speak right now with the way the world is and how they're literally rewriting history in front of our very eyes. That's the one subject that we do like a lot of follow up on. So, in particular, when we were talking, when my older daughter was learning about the first 5 amendments and whatnot, we actually had a supplemental class and we completely went off book. And I said, okay, which one's the most important, amendment, right? Or what's the most important freedom? That way, I wasn't really getting towards, hey, I want you to remember the amendments. You need to really understand what the freedoms are. And I was trying to get her to have a conversation about that, and and not just read the text, answer the questions, and then move on, because that's what a lot of it is. I wanted to have that comprehensive conversation with her to make sure that she understood what she was learning, more than just a few questions at the end of a chapter where she had to answer.
Yeah, that's
so.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know what else to add to that. You've got it pegged correctly. There's no doubt that the supplemental information is sometimes the most valuable.
The thing that I told my wife is, and it's an issue across the board. One, parents are lazy. And even the best parents are sometimes lazy, and rightfully so. We, especially the ones that have to work all day. You want to come home, and the last thing you want to do is do more work. And kids are work. There ain't no ifs, ands, buts about it. But you have to have a relationship with your kids, regardless of what they're learning. Right? Like, you have to know who they are, what they stand for, no matter what age they are. And have that relationship with them and understand where they're coming from. And I would argue that that's where a lot of parents, especially with public school, where they drop the ball, right? Because, they send their kids to school and they don't know what they do all day. Like they'll come home, hey, what'd you learn? And then they'll get that, the normal. And that's like the end of the conversation, right? Where, like, a good example of that would be with my kid. We know damn well what we're teaching her because we're the ones teaching her it, right? But we still have that conversation with her to make sure that she's comprehending it, and then we kind of want to know what she thinks about it all, right? So especially on, like, subjects that aren't math, right? Like, oh, hey, what'd you think of your history? What did you think about this? Like, oh, hey, you learned about some science today. What did you think about this concept? Do you understand this concept? And all that type of stuff, right? And then obviously when she's reading, hey, what'd you read? And then, what did you like about the reading? What didn't you like? And I know that's kind of getting into some feelings and stuff like that, but I personally cannot tailor my kid's education to her if I don't understand what she's grasping and what she's not grasping. And if she doesn't enjoy something like math, she hates math. She used to love it, but she hates it now because she thinks it's just, to her, she just says boring. So now it's on me, right, to come up with a way that makes it less boring. That way she doesn't want to refuse to do it and do her other subjects instead, which she'll do if we let her, right? Like, if we don't monitor her, she'll let the math just keep sliding and sliding and sliding. she'll keep working on the other subjects, and then all of a sudden she's behind on math. So I think that's where every parent fails, is you have to have a relationship with your kids. You have to know what they're doing, what they're thinking, and you can't do that unless you have a relationship with them. And that's what we try to do, and it's not easy. I mean, it's also not that hard, I don't think, either, as long as you know your kids. But
yeah,
that's kind of one of the missteps that we see. And it was kind of a breath of fresh air. I think it was about a week or two ago when you were sitting there talking about it. And I pointed it out to my wife, and I said, hey, you need to listen to this. And it was the part of your episode where you were talking about, take the time at the end of the day, 30 minutes to an hour, and go over what your kid learned with them for the day, right? And I don't know if you remember talking about that, but
yeah, I do it all the time. I mean, again, everything that you just said is 100% the way it's supposed to be done. And that's the step in the learning process for any human being that a lot of parents just don't engage in.
Right.
It will be, how was school? Kid says, fine. And then that's it.
Right.
Rather than not just what did you do in Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so's class, but show me what you did.
Right.
Teach
so
it. Heaven forbid the child teach it to the parent.
Right. Well, and I will say I was pretty fortunate. Even though I was in public school, I had a dad that cared so much about my education that he did that with me. And he took personal time on the weekends to not only, I guess tutor would be the right word. He would tutor me, or actually he was tutoring other kids that were struggling in my math class, and then he made me do it with them. And luckily I like math, so it wasn't, a complete bore to me. And I know people are probably rolling their eyes because I said I like math, and I find it fun. But to me, it's just another puzzle. So
Yeah.
I like puzzles, so I just see it as more puzzles, just of a different sort. So I was fortunate enough to have a parent that did that with me. Maybe not for every subject, but at least for, some of the ones that, the four subjects that matter. And that's what we try to stress on our kid is, we always sit there and tell her, like, hey, history, science, those are all great and all, but we really need you to focus on the big four. You focus on the big four, then we can do these other subjects. And then we kind of, explain to her, like, hey, when you're doing history, you're actually reading. So you are covering one of your major subjects. So you're kind of knocking out two birds with one stone. So, hey, guess what? You don't have to do a ton of reading today because you've already done a ton of reading.
Yep,
so,
that's it. That's
yeah.
absolutely, that's excellent. And again, what your dad was doing with the weekend strategy, so to speak, is even an excellent strategy as well. Take an hour on a Saturday or an hour on a Sunday,
right.
And have your child go over what they did the previous week with you. Yeah, and again, that's just another refresher, and all of that stuff just ingrains it into the child's mind as to what it is that's going on and what they're supposed to be learning, and any opportunity that they have to repeat it back to the family members, that means that all parties are learning, and that's a good thing.
Oh, yeah. And then, we also see that the more that we ask about it, the more they're forthcoming with the information. So an example, I guess, would be if I sit there and just keep asking, my daughter, hey, what'd you do? What'd you do? What'd you do? Tell me what you did. There's times where she'll do it on her own. I don't even have to ask. And she's actually excited about what she learned. Normally it's in the subjects that she cares about more and not math. But, and then I'll see her do that with my wife as well. Like my wife will come home if she's still awake and she'll go, Mom, I learned this today. It's just like, cool. She's actually enjoying enjoying school, like she should. She should enjoy learning. It shouldn't be something that's a miserable, experience. So it just kind of compounds everything together and just, kind of wraps it up nicely, if you will.
It's amazing how much the human mind can learn when they're not, when the child isn't being tortured, isn't it?
Yeah. And if they're not behind a stupid screen, which is a big one for us. Like we've done a pretty good job of cutting out the TV over the last, several months, but that's a big one.
Yeah. Well, it's working. Whatever you're doing, it's working.
Right.
Let me ask you about your Army Reserve exemption experience. What's been going on with that?
Well, first, it's a shit show. So just put that out there now. So I've been in almost 13 years. So I did 8 years active duty, and then I've been a reservist since 2016. So about a little over 5 years now, I guess. So obviously the mandate came out for everybody in the service to get it. Now, obviously, active duty is always going to be ahead of the curve when it comes to any type of mandate or new order or anything in terms of, that type of stuff. So, National Guard and the reserves are always going to fall behind just because they're not full time. The whole term weekend warriors rings true, right? So now a lot of stuff does not happen at the unit level and at the individual level until that one weekend. Now, big Army Reserves, big National Guard, a little bit different story. You'll see those things. You'll see those types of orders and mandates and stuff like that, even if it's not vaccine related, or whatever. You'll see that stuff move a lot faster because at the higher echelons, a lot of those people have full-time staffers that are basically active duty, just not in an active duty unit. So there's some background for you. So that order came out, I think it was I could be wrong, I'm pretty sure it was in August. I purposely dragged my feet on it, just because why raise a flag and let people know how I believe if I don't need to, right? So the unit was really bad about, they asked one time, hey, did everybody get it? I responded no. A couple other people responded no, in a group text that we do. And then that was the end of it. Hey, just a reminder, it's free. You can go to Walgreens and get it any time with this voucher, yada, 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 right? And then that was the end of it. And luckily for me, you don't have to go to every weekend, and not intentionally to try to get out of, getting the vaccine or anything like that, but just because of, personal, real life stuff coming up. There were some times where I took, like a month off, or I rescheduled it, so I wasn't necessarily, doing my weekend time at the same time as my unit. So goes through the entire process. I actually made it all the way to my December drill, which was a couple weeks ago, to where I never got told I had to go take it, right? Outside of the mandate that came down from General Austin, there was nothing at the unit level or at my command level that said, hey, you need to go get it, right? And I'm kind of using that as a little bit of hey, you guys are excelling this timeline with me. Just know that, I was never instructed at the unit level to go get it. So I'm purposely using that just as a means of drag the feet. And the only reason why I'm doing that is I'm trying to delay the inevitable. Me and my wife have already come to terms with, I'm probably going to get dishonorably discharged. As much as I don't want to be, I will not get the jab ever. So that doesn't really change how I feel about it, even though I'll lose out on a lot of benefits and then I'll be marked basically like a felon, and whatnot. So,
make sure you,
I am in the middle.
Make sure before you get dishonorably discharged, make sure you buy guns.
Way ahead of you.
Attaboy.
Yeah. I already did it. Already did it. And I had some before I knew, but there was one in particular that I won't broadcast that I went out and got just to make sure.
Glorious.
Yeah. And then my wife will go buy them too. She don't care. She has her own guns and whatnot. So, and she's a pretty good shot. And I'm pretty sure I have some family members that would go get it. Go get me something if I needed to.
There you go. Yeah.
But so I am in the middle. I don't qualify for a medical exemption. because they only do medical and religious exemptions in the military, and from what I've told, the medical exemption is pretty hard to get. You have to have, basically, the only way you're getting a medical exemption is if you can prove that you have an allergic reaction to one of the ingredients, right? So that's the way that I understand it. I could be wrong, but that's how it was basically told to me. So there's not that many people getting that. From the people that I've talked to on active duty, and from the people that I've talked to in my unit, I have yet to meet someone who has gotten the religious exemption. And I have not heard of anybody getting the religious exemption. So that's why I think inevitably I'm probably going to get some type of discharge. My wife is hopeful that I don't get the dishonorable, but it is a general order, and it's a general order level 1, and for us that's kind of like a death sentence. Like if you don't do general order 1, which is what this vaccine falls under that category, it could result in dishonorable, which is ridiculous and stupid. But I don't make the rules. But so right now I've been able to drag my feet some more this month because with me being in the reserves, people aren't having me every day for my exemption letter. So I have actually not turned in my exemption memo. And when they ask me why I haven't done it, the reason I'm going to give is, well, one, I want to go over my memo when I turn it in, right? Like I don't want to just hand in a piece of paper that I signed and say, here you go, it's in your hands. Read it however way you want, and interpret it however way you want, and woe is me, basically. So what my plan is I don't even plan on signing it until I have a witness, and that's going to be my excuse that I use for why I haven't turned it in sooner, because I want an actual witness seeing that I was the person that signed the document, not somebody else. And then that way I have the opportunity to kind of go over that document, prior to turning it in. The one that you have on your website, I think it's your website, and then the same one that's rolling around on GAD, that one that's like the military one that's like well over 20 pages long, is going to be the one that I end up using, just because it covers every religion. And it's the most detailed. You would not believe the memo that they gave me. The memo they gave me for me to fill out, which I will not fill out, was a 1-page exemption letter, right? Sorry, I took a drink. And basically it was, subject line, you fill in the blank, hey, I'm not getting this vaccine because, and then it's like, it was a bunch of fill in the blank type stuff, and it was so rudimentary and so kindergarten in terms of memos that I've seen, and I've seen a bunch in my time in the military, that I was like kind of ashamed that I was a part of an organization that, hey, you know what, I want to claim religious exemption, and you guys aren't really taking it serious. And that's kind of where I'm at now. And I told my wife, like if I get this religious exemption, I have it because of how long I've been in. I can opt out of the Army and just finish my time because of the type of contract that I'm on now. I'm on what they call an indefinite contract, and I have to get approval for it, but I can voluntarily exit the Army, and I don't owe the Army any type of time or anything like that, just because of how long I've been in. So obviously I wouldn't get my retirement benefits, but I would still be able to, use the VA. I could still claim all my disabilities, which I definitely have. And I will lose those if I get dishonorably discharged, which is another big one for me, is, I'm going to lose out on all that stuff. So that's kind of the road that we're at right now. I imagine here in about another week and a half, they're going to probably try to drop another hammer on me, but, I'll be ready for them. And then I have to have a talk with a chaplain at some point. And I think our unit chaplain is Protestant, which is good because, for the most part, I'm Protestant. So we can have a conversation, but he's not ready for that conversation. I can tell you that right now. Because I'm going to come in there and I'm going to have so much documentation. I'm basically going to be bringing in a binder of talking points and to go over all my different convictions of why I will not be getting the jab, including the fact that there's, human cells in the jab themselves, so that automatically means that I can't take it.
Yep.
So, that should be enough, but I'm going to go over more stuff on top of that. So, the chaplain's not ready for it, and I can tell you right now, this is the grim news, and this is kind of what I've been trying to do whenever people post military news about the jab on Gab. I try to tell them that it's a lot grimmer than they think it is. I would say there's a lot more people jabbed than there are unjabbed in the military. These numbers that people say, oh, it can't be just, 1,500 people in the Marines that didn't get the jab. No, I assure you that's probably the accurate number, because I know active duty units that didn't lose a single person in the Army because everybody got jabbed. I'm the only one in my unit, and it's not a big unit, mind you, because we're reservists, but our bigger echelon unit is, if you go up high enough, is, right around the 700 to 1,000 mark. I think I'm the only one that's unjabbed. So I know it's grim, and it's, not the best of news, but it's got to be said, and that's why I keep telling people on Gab is, like, look, you guys need to understand that military's folding, like, left and right, and everybody's taking it, and people are like, well, why are they taking it? Well, a lot of people don't understand that this is, for a lot of people, this is their only job. Like, a lot of people in the military, it's not the best of the best anymore, right? Like, it's not like it was back when I first joined. There are a lot of people that just can't get a job out as a civilian, so they join the military as like a last resort. And, they're not, is the military for them? No. Can they make it work? Yeah. But it's not like, and then they're using that as their entire livelihood. And there's some people that, depending on how many kids they have, I know a lot of guys in the military that have 5, 6 kids. They're not going to get out of the military anytime soon because that's their cushion, right? And that's what they're going to do, is they're going to use all this fear out there as that cushion to go get jabbed and keep that job, because they don't know what to do on the other side. Like they're not entrepreneurs. They're not going to be able to go out there and start their own business. Depending on what job they have in the military, they may be able to transfer it and use it in another position. But if they get dishonorably discharged, they're not going to get hired by most employers anyway, because that's the same thing as being a felon.
Yeah.
So a lot of people don't understand that aspect of why are so many people taking the jab. Well, it's because dishonorably discharged is a much heavier burden than most people realize, and we lose every benefit that we have, if we get discharged in that fashion. And I have not told my family yet. I've told my wife's family, because they're a little bit more understanding, and I told them, hey, look, this is how I feel. We're willing to roll the dice with the dishonorable discharge because we can make it. My employer won't fire me, for getting dishonorably discharged, so I don't have to worry about that. But if they did, I'll go into business for myself, which I've done before, and we'll make it work, But yeah, I haven't had that conversation with my family yet, but they'll never listen to this podcast.
I was going to ask you too. One of the things that we're not hearing about at all, at least I'm not, is any of the adverse reactions among military personnel.
Yeah, so I know that there's that one video floating around about the Air Force. I think she was a colonel, where she grounded some flights from pilots that were having adverse reactions.
That's right. Yeah. So
outside of that one, I will tell you, I have not seen anything on the news either. I will tell you that, in terms of reactions, personally in my unit, the worst I've heard so far is I fell sick for a couple of weeks after I took the jab. My arm was sore, stuff like that. But I promise you the blood clots are coming. Because all these guys during COVID blew up. Like they weren't working because they couldn't go to. They were of the mindset that the country's locked down, so they can't go to the gym. So they all gained massive weight, and now a lot of them are well over what they used to be at. It's nuts because I lost weight during the pandemic because I changed my diet, and and whatnot. But these guys gained weight because they were just eating and not doing anything. So it's crazy how much bigger they've gotten, and they're big guys to begin with, right? Like they're not small guys. And then, so I've heard that. I haven't heard any other adverse reactions, but I imagine they're coming. I haven't heard anything about the military, requiring boosters. Obviously, that news article came out, I think it was last week, about how the Army created their own, I guess, super vaccine. That's like a one doser, which I imagine will hurt my chances of staying in the military even more, because they're going to be like, oh, you don't have to worry about getting the other ones. You can get this one.
Yeah.
So, and then I would say, especially for a lot of the military, I think a lot of them, I would say the majority of the military that took it when they took it probably took the Johnson & Johnson, the one-dose one, at the very beginning of this year, because when I was in Afghanistan in January, that's when the unit that I was with and who I was supporting, they were doing the vaccines, and it was the Johnson & Johnson one-doser that was going around. Now, I know that one's not much better, but from what I've seen, if you're going to get one, that might be the one to get. I know they get blood clots too, but at least it's not altering your DNA, at least that we know of. So I think that might have something to do with it. And then you got to understand, a lot of the military, it's not half as active as it used to be, because with all these different scares, I imagine they're shutting down physical training left and right. Like, my unit hasn't done joint physical training together in over a year. We did our physical training test, but that was it. We didn't do anything else, and we haven't done. They don't. Obviously there's requirements out there, but with a unit like ours, and with as much rank as we have in our unit, we're pretty relaxed on those standards. But I would imagine that once they open up and they start making units start running like crazy again, I imagine you'll start seeing more people drop, because that's what you're seeing with all those soccer and football players around the world.
Yeah.
It's the athletes that run all the time. They're dropping like flies because their heart rate's going up. And I imagine that when soldiers' heart rates start going up, that's when you'll start seeing a lot more drop. And I'll tell you right now, there's such a lack of media coverage for everything in the military that if there were adverse reactions right now, you would, like, as dark as it is right now for normal civilians when they're dropping, it's even darker for everything military, because there was a vehicle-borne explosion in the base that I was at in Afghanistan, and it was massive. Now, nobody died, but it was massive. Should have been front page news, because it was right in the middle of the peace talks, right? And we got, attacked pretty heavily, and it was the biggest attack in a few years while I was there, and complete, utter silence across all media. Because I called up my parents and said, hey, and my wife, I go, hey, sorry, I haven't talked to y'all in a couple days. We were on total blackout over here. We had this big giant explosion on base, followed by some small arms fire, which is mainly like AK-47 related, munitions being used. So it was a pretty big attack, and nobody had heard anything about it. And then I came home, didn't really see any news about it, even a year later. And I was like, that is crazy. That just goes to show you how little the American people know about what goes on in their wars.
Yeah.
So I imagine that it's probably complete darkness and purposeful blackouts on anything related to the military, because they don't want anybody getting wind of people getting adverse reactions.
And I mean, you really have no choice but to say, well, they're the military. They have to know that this entire thing is a kill program. And then you say to yourself, well, wait a minute. They know it's a kill program, and they're still pushing it. So they're culpable in this entire thing.
Yep. So So it's beyond nuts. And I've seen a lot of things in my time. And I gotta credit the Army, because I was somewhat red-pilled before the Army, but the Army red-pilled me on a lot, right? Just because I'm getting to see the world. I got to see the world. I got to go to a bunch of different, countries. I'm getting to see how America is viewed from the outside. On other major news. Not the BBC, obviously. Like I'm talking about, like, other large countries like India and other stuff like that. How they view us. How they report some of our news and stuff like that. So you kind of get a different mindset of how everything's done. And it was I would say my first 2 years, I was probably red-pilled to the majority of what is everything that's on now, and I've been red-pilled for a while on just about everything. I don't think there's not much that surprises me, and there's not much that I'm not already tracking usually. And the second all this stuff came out, like, the majority of the people that I was with when I was in Afghanistan were like, "Oh, this is stupid. It's just the flu," and like everybody knew it, but because they just kept pushing and pushing and pushing, and I guess because they were able to showcase on TV that people were dying, right? Not to the degree that they were actually saying, but enough people have lost a loved one at this point that, that one loved one is enough to scare them into submission.
Yeah.
So, and it's just nuts, because even when I was there, like, we were forced to wear our masks, and the only time that we were really forced to wear them is when we had to go to what we call the dining facility, which is where basically our cafeteria, and that's the only way that you can get food there. And if you don't wear the mask, you don't come in. So it's just like, well, you got to eat. So it's like, as much as stupid as I thought it was, I'd put it on, and then the second I was out of that place, I would be taking it off and whatnot. So, and most of the people that were there at the time were doing the same thing. I can't imagine what it was like. Like, if we were still there, I can't imagine what it would be like right now.
The one thing that I even thought about it today, thinking back to March and April of 2020. The one thing that I just kept saying when I would leave the house and go walk around and just observe people in public with the mask wearing and the distancing, I would say out loud, with wrinkles on my face and my eyes as big as saucers, I would just say, they're actually falling for it.
Yeah.
They're actually going along with this like it's real. I couldn't believe it.
The term sheeple doesn't do it justice. Like, there needs to be another word
slave
made up. They are at this point. So I guess that would be a good word. I know we've tossed that word around in our house, that everyone's enslaved. So I guess that would be the right word to call it. But it is just nuts. And speaking to that, right, you would think in a pretty red state like ours, and, between Governor Abbott and Governor DeSantis, they've been pretty much at the forefront for, trying to get their states their freedom back, as terrible as Abbott is. And I can't wait till I hope he gets replaced. But, we're in a pretty free state, and I get it. Dallas is a pretty liberal city, because that's where all the money, and and it's a big metroplex. But I tell my wife all the time, because she's kind of in a bubble over here. She only kind of goes to work and then goes home, and her work is not that far from her house, and it's in a much, much smaller community. She's kind of in a bubble because she doesn't really see people wearing masks, especially since she's at a gym and they don't really allow it. So they don't enforce anybody to wear a mask or anything like that. So, like, nobody wears masks there, and they're all professing to be healthy, as opposed to jab heavy and stuff like that. Although I do think the majority of them are jabbed, and I've told her that. But it's crazy how much I can walk around now, and I feel like over the summer the mask was pretty much non-existent. Right? You were hard-pressed to find someone wearing a mask. And then and I don't remember when it was, because it was so long ago now, but when the Delta variant, quote-unquote, came out, ever since then, the masks have come back out, and they're not, not everybody's wearing them, so there's some dissenters out there, but there's a lot more than I would care to see. And I tell family members, because, for the most part, I'm one of the few that go into Dallas because of how far of a drive it is. Like, it's a long drive for me. But I tell them, I'm like, look, you're in a red state, and there's a lot of people that work in Dallas, and not everybody that works in Dallas is obviously from Dallas, so it's a lot of people that are driving into Dallas from the outskirts, like me and whatnot. I go, there's a lot of mask wearing. There's a lot of people, and I guarantee you, the people that are wearing masks, it's got to be jabbed, right?
Yeah, that's the dead giveaway.
So that's what I tell people, and I told my wife, I was like, yeah, you're in a bubble over here. You have no idea what Dallas is like, and Dallas is getting back to the point where I think I see more masked people than I do unmasked people. And the crazy part is, you still see them walking outside wearing a mask. I mean, we make fun of them from time to time, but our freaking neighbor, back when it was mowing season, he was not wearing a dust mask. He was wearing a COVID mask to mow his yard, and he's outside by himself. And then I've seen him get into his car by himself wearing the mask and drive off by himself wearing the mask. Like, you can't get more dumb.
No, you can't, and you can't help that person. They're gone.
Oh Lord, no, we don't talk to that. We've never. The best they've gotten from us is a wave.
Amazing.
It's crazy. But then like we talked about earlier, my parents are right there in that same boat, and it's just nuts. Because it's like, come on, y'all are supposed to be smarter than that. But all they do is watch Channel 8 News all the time, or ABC News all the time.
Yeah, that's not good.
No.
Do me a quick favor if you can, and again, I'm sorry for your loss, but describe your uncle's passing here.
Yeah, so this was pretty nuts. But I've told my wife, you need to prepare, because anybody that's jabbed, which at this point, I think we're one of the very, very few in our entire family on both sides that is not jabbed. Like, she's got a few cousins that are our age that aren't, and we're working on building our own community, and doing that type of, and coming together and getting ready for what's coming. So that's the plus side, but I've been telling her, get ready, because this is the sixth season, and we're going to start losing some people. I mean, hell, my mom has bronchitis right now, and I talked to her earlier today, and she sounded terrible. So who knows? She might be next on the chopping block, which I know is terrible. But I tried telling her not to get it. Even her own doctor told her not to get it because she's immunocompromised. So, if she's not going to listen to her own doctor, who's she going to listen to? But so with my uncle, he what started with them is he actually had just got done marrying his youngest daughter. So he was actually the pastor that wed them, and they had a wedding. And I guess a lady at his daughter's work came into sick who was quote unquote COVID positive. I'm going to say she had pneumonia. Gave my cousin pneumonia, and then my cousin, who still lived with her mom and dad at the time, gave her sister, her mom and dad, and her 3 kids pneumonia, and my grandmother was visiting at the same time. Luckily, the oldest person in that house did not catch COVID or pneumonia. Explain that one to me. I don't know how, but everybody in the house was jabbed except for the kids, because they're all underage. Thank God. Hope they never get it. The young kids. I mean, my cousin's kids. Sorry.
Yeah.
And it took a while for him to get sick. Everybody got sick. He was one of the last ones to get it. They were all pretty, I would say, decently bad. Like normal bronchitis and pneumonia. It's not a walk in the park, but it's not the end of the world most of the time, as long as you're somewhat healthy. He was probably the healthiest person in that house, because he had just recently lost a ton of weight over the last few years. He was the last one to get sick. Eventually, I guess his got bad enough to where he had a hard time breathing, so they took him to the hospital. Well, it turns out he did have what my mom liked to call COVID pneumonia, which is not a thing. So he just had pneumonia. And I knew instantly that he caught pneumonia and his body couldn't fight it because he'd been double jabbed, right? So I told my wife, I go, well, if they put him on a ventilator at any point, he's probably toast, right? He's not going to make it. And it sucks. And it's sad for him and his family and whatnot, my aunt. And, so we put him on our prayer list, and then we started praying for the entire family, pretty much every day, and I was checking in, with my aunt and my mom, every day about him because she was getting updates. It was pretty insane. So they were in Arizona, in the Phoenix area, and they were only letting one visitor a day come to the hospital for one. And then they were only letting them come between 2 and 6 p.m., and you were only allowed to stay either for an hour or 2 hours max for, visitation or whatever. So, basically it's prison, but in the hospital, which I thought was ridiculous. But he was gradually getting worse, but then gradually getting better. They didn't put him on a ventilator for a few days. They were, I don't know what medication they were giving him. I was trying to get the names of the medication. Obviously, I recommended ivermectin. That probably never happened. Otherwise, he'd be alive. Eventually they did a scan of his body because he was starting to lose feeling in his foot. So he had a blood clot in his leg somewhere around, I think, his calf muscle down into his ankle. When they scanned the rest of his body, he had a total of 5 blood clots. One of them was on his lungs. Right? So, if you didn't think it was jab-related before, the blood clots is kind of a dead giveaway to me. Even though my family doesn't see it that way, they were like, oh my God, what a tragic, situation. I can't believe he caught COVID and got sick. Well, COVID doesn't give you blood clots. Just putting that out there.
Yep.
But, so they eventually transferred him to another hospital because they were going to try to do surgery on him to remove the blood clots. But one in the leg was dissipating enough on his own that they didn't need to do surgery on that one. And then they noticed that when he was at the specialist, if you will, they're like, oh, they're all dissipating on their own. He's getting enough blood flow. We're not going to put him under because if we put him under, they'd have to, they'd basically have to put him in an induced coma. And they thought that by putting him in an induced coma, that would kill him. It's because obviously you're not breathing as much, even though they would put him on I think it's an IPAP machine, which is not quite a ventilator, but getting there, I guess. You may know better than me.
I don't.
Yeah, so it's not like the CPAP machine, right? So I was told it's kind of like a CPAP machine, but a little bit different. And I think it's called the IPAP. I'm sure there's some medical personnel out there rolling their eyes or whatever because I'm butchering it. But so they had him on that while they're, and to assist his breathing because obviously with the blood clot on his lung, he was getting, I think they said his breathing, for lack of better words, his breathing score was around a 43 as opposed to the high 90s that he was supposed to be at. So obviously he's at like half capacity for breathing, right? So they wanted to put him on that. They were trying to avoid putting him on the ventilator because they flat out told my aunt they thought that if they put him on a ventilator, it would kill him. Because it wouldn't be it'd be like the death sentence. And then it got to the point where I guess he hit a turn for the worse, and he ended up passing away on Christmas Eve around a little bit after noon on Christmas Eve. That's whenever, and then I didn't find out until Christmas Eve evening when we were at a Christmas party. I finally got the call, and I was expecting it. So every time my mom and dad called me to give me updates, I figured it was always going to be he's passed, and whatnot. And earlier that morning, we had gotten a notification that the hospital was allowing his wife and kids to come up there and basically say goodbye because they didn't think he was going to make it through the day. So they weren't allowed to go up there, I guess, all at once, or maybe they took turns. I don't know. It's all diabolical. And then he passed, and then they're doing the funeral sometime this week. I'm not going to get to go because, work, and I don't know if I want to be around a bunch of jab people, even if it is outside. So, I mean, being around my parents is a little bit different just because I've been around them already. So, I don't want to be around jab people that I haven't been around. So, but, yeah, I mean, if that's not more proof that the jab is killing people, I don't know what more physical proof people need. You'll never get a doctor to, confirm that's what it was. Oh, he died from pneumonia. Okay, then, I've had pneumonia about 5 times throughout my life, when I was considerably younger, to the point where I got hospitalized twice with it. I don't ever remember getting blood clots from pneumonia. And I've had bronchitis probably a couple dozen times, right? So you don't get, unless, they're changing the medical diaries to, include blood clots for pneumonia and bronchitis. I don't think you can get a blood clot from either one of those illnesses. So how do you explain that?
Yep, that's an excellent explanation. Pneumonia doesn't give you blood clots.
Yeah. So, and I don't remember seeing blood clots on the fake list of COVID symptoms. So maybe they've added it down there now since the jab is doing it. But
wow. I'm sorry for your loss. I mean, clearly the thing that's getting a lot of us through this is just our knowledge and our willingness to just learn and keep learning. And that, I think, that right there is a massive buffer, because we're not surprised when these things are occurring. We know exactly what's happening, and I feel terrible for the people that still don't get it. I mean, they just don't understand, and they just aren't making the connections.
Oh, it's insane, because you would think something like this would wake my parents up, and yet it still hasn't. And I don't want to. I told my wife before we went over there for Christmas, because we went. So obviously Christmas Eve was Friday. We didn't go to my parents' house until Sunday. And my wife goes, "Are you gonna bring any of this up?" And I go, "Hell no." I go, "Why would I willingly start an argument and a debate, on Christmas Day that might fracture the relationship once and for all to where I never talk to them again, right? Like, I don't want to be the a-hole that does that, right? Now, I told her, I go, now, if it gets brought up by somebody else and they want to have that discussion, then I will gladly chime in. But I don't want to be the cause of the argument, right? So, because and it was primarily because it was Christmas, because for all I know, that could be my last Christmas with my parents, right? So I would rather it be somewhat memorable, because for me, I was in a weird predicament. It's not the same for my wife, but because of how long I was gone in Afghanistan, I ended up missing between the time that I took to go there and the time that I was actually there. I ended up missing 4 Christmases in a row, right? Yeah. And so for me, this was the first Christmas that I didn't have to do through a cell phone in forever. So it's like, I'm just trying to make it, a memory as best as I can. That's what I told her. I was like, look, this is my first Christmas with my family, and God knows how long. It might be my last. I need to make the best of it that I can. That way I can hold on to the memories and cherish it. There'll be another day to have that argument. There'll be another day to have that fight. That day's not that day. So, and she was like, oh, okay, and she's like, well, I won't bite my tongue either if they bring it up. I'm like, okay, because we're I couldn't have asked for a better spouse. She took a lot longer to red pill, but she's always been supportive of my beliefs and, the crazy that is me, and we're right there. Like, there's never been a discussion where, oh, are you thinking about getting the jab? And then I got to talk her out of it, and vice versa. Like, that's never been a thing. We pretty much see eye to eye across the board, and thank God every day that he put her back in my path, and we were able to get married, and I couldn't have asked a better person to have kids with, because I can't imagine the people that are going through all this craziness, and they don't have a spouse that lines up with their principles, because I couldn't imagine it. There'd be no way. I would completely lose my mind.
Thank you for listening to American Education FM. Make sure and check out AmericanEducationFM.com for more information. Take care and God bless.